A massive shock has hit the land of the Golden Crown. Just when everyone thought the other wives were waiting to celebrate the downfall of Olori's shadow, something unbelievable happened. A blood relative, a cousin called Abigail, entered the palace to mock her own flesh and blood. But she didn't realize that the palace lions were now guarding the wounded sheep. Why did Dr. Elizabeth and the other wives stand up for their former enemy? What did Abigail say that made the palace erupt in anger? Welcome to Crown Gist. If you want to know what happens when the hunters become the protectors and when family blood turns cold, you are in the right place. Subscribe now and join the Crown Gist family so you don't miss any of the hits coming out of the palace. A short prayer for my Crown Gist friends and families. May God protect you from the enemies who share your last name, and may you find mercy in the places where people expected you to be shamed. Amen. The atmosphere in the land of the Golden Crown was heavy, the kind of heavy that feels like the sky is about to fall. This wasn't a day for celebrations or royal flutes, it was a day of silence. Olori's shadow had just returned to her relocated quarters after her child was taken away for the sacred cleansing. My Crown Gist friends and families, any mother knows the pain of having a child taken from her arms, even if it is for a holy ritual. She felt empty, shaky, and completely drained of her Jagaban spirit. She sat in that small space, her wrapper loosely tied, her eyes swollen like someone who had cried a river and was now out of water. Suddenly, the silence was broken. Abigail, a cousin, not a stranger, not a rival, but blood family, arrived at the palace. She claimed she was there to collect 7 dishes that had been used for the family's peace talks with the elders. Everything looked normal. She came with a vehicle and the confidence of someone who belongs. But trouble doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a smile and speaks with a familiar voice. Instead of just taking the dishes and leaving, Abigail insisted on greeting Olori's shadow. The palace servant hesitated. They knew the Olori was in a dark place emotionally, but Abigail pushed her way through. When she entered the small quarters where Olori's shadow had been relegated, she didn't offer a hug, she didn't offer a prayer. Instead, she stood there looking around the small room with a look of fake pity. "So, this is where you are staying now?" Abigail asked. The words landed like a physical slap in the room. "So, this is how everything has turned. Life is funny, oh?" My Crown Gist friends and families, the malice in those words was so sharp it could pierce a stone. She started talking about how quickly things change, how people should be humble, and how power doesn't last forever. She was mocking her own cousin at her lowest point right after her child had been taken. Olori's shadow tried to act like she didn't hear the poison, but the tears started falling again, heavy, silent tears that soaked her chest.
The room was small, and the air was thick with the sound of Olori's shadow's heavy sobs. Abigail stood there like a judge, looking down at her cousin with a spirit of "I told you so." She was enjoying the sight of the mighty Jagaban reduced to a woman sitting on the floor with a loose wrapper. She thought she was the one holding the power, but she didn't notice the shadows moving at the entrance. What Abigail didn't realize was that Kabiesi's other wives had followed her. TikTok Olori, Dr. Elizabeth, and even the one they call Kabiesi Bro were standing right there listening to every wicked word. These were women who had fought with Olori's shadow for years. They were women who had been insulted by her, envied by her, and pushed aside by her. Normally, people would think they would join Abigail to laugh. They would think this was the moment they had been waiting for. But something had shifted in the land of the Golden Crown. When Abigail laughed slightly and said, "I'm just teaching her a life lesson," the temperature in the room changed. Dr. Elizabeth was the first to step into the light. Now, my Crown Gist friends and families, you know that Dr. Elizabeth does not take nonsense. She walked straight up to Abigail and looked her in the eye. Her voice was like cold steel. What exactly are you saying to her? She demanded. Abigail tried to act cool. She smiled that fake smile and said, "Oh, I'm just greeting my cousin. I'm just telling her the truth about life." But before she could finish, TikTok Olori stepped forward too. Her voice was firm and shaking with a different kind of anger. "Is this the time for a lesson? Can't you see she is already broken? Can't you see she has nothing left to give?" Abigail tried to defend herself, saying that everyone must face the consequences of their actions. She thought she was being righteous, but to the wives who had lived through the palace fire, she just looked like a vulture trying to eat a wounded bird. The atmosphere became explosive. The same wives, who the world thought hated Olori Shadow, suddenly surrounded Abigail. It was a sight that would shock anyone. One of the wives shouted, "Who are you to come here and mock her? Are you the one who created her?" Another one said it, "If you want to preach, go and do it in your own house, not here." They were protecting the very woman they used to call their enemy. They saw that even though Olori Shadow has made mistakes, she was already paying the price. She had lost her position, her child had been taken for rituals, and she was in a dark corner. To the wives, Abigail's mockery was an insult to the entire real house.
The room was vibrating with the anger of women who had seen too much and suffered too much to allow a stranger, even a blood relative, to bring more darkness into their space. Abigail was looking around like a trapped animal. She had expected the wives to join her in the laughter. She thought she was doing them a favor by rubbing salt in Olori Shadow's wounds, but instead she found herself facing a wall of royal fire. Dr. Elizabeth took a step closer, her eyes flashing with a light that made Abigail stumble back. "You think you are holy?" Dr. Elizabeth asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You stand here talking about consequences and life lessons while your sister is drowning in tears? Look at her." She pointed to Olori Shadow, who was still on the floor, her body shaking with that kind of deep, silent crying that makes the chest ache. She is already paying the price. The Golden King has spoken, the law has been applied, and she is serving her time. What else do you want to prove? Do you want to take her life too? Another wife stepped forward, her voice rising to join the chorus of protection. "Every woman in this palace has cried," she said, her voice heavy with the weight of her own history. "Some of us cried in the middle of the night where nobody could see. Some of us cried in public while we were wearing gold and lace. We have all tasted bitterness in this land of the golden crown. So don't you dare come here acting like you are clean. Don't you dare come here to act holy while you are trying to destroy what is already broken." My crown gist friends and families, you could see the fear finally entering Abigail's eyes. She tried to open her mouth to argue, to say that she was only telling the truth, but the wives were not having it. The same women who people said were waiting for Olori Shadow's downfall were now acting like her personal army. They saw that Abigail wasn't there for justice. She was there for eye service and spite. She was the kind of family member who only shows up when there is a tragedy to talk about. The tension reached a boiling point. The wives began to surround her, their voices rising in a unified chant of "enough." They weren't just defending Olori Shadow, they were defending the sanctity of their home. They were telling the world that whatever happens inside the palace stays inside the palace, and no outsider has the right to come and kick a woman when she is already down on her knees. The palace walls practically shook with the intensity of the wives' anger. Dr. Elizabeth was no longer just talking, she was vibrating with a holy rage that Abigail never saw coming. "Get out!" Dr. Elizabeth screamed, her voice echoing through the corridors of the land of the Golden Crown. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" She didn't just say it once. She chanted it like a spiritual command, pointing her finger directly at the palace gates. The other wives joined in, their voices forming a wall of sound that pushed Abigail back toward the door. My crown gist friends and families, it was a sight to behold. The woman who came with style to mock her own blood was now being humiliated by the very women she thought were her allies in hatred.
Abigail tried to pack her face, but there was no dignity left. She was literally embarrassed out of the quarters. She scrambled toward the vehicle she brought to pack the 7 dishes, looking left and right like someone who had just escaped a lion's den. As Abigail fled, the palace returned to a strange, heavy silence. But this time, the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of war, it was the silence of a new kind of protection. Olori's shadow was still on the floor, but she wasn't alone anymore. Even though she's serving her punishment and is relegated to those small quarters, she now knows that the enemies she feared have become the sisters she never knew she had. The wives had shown that even in a house of rivalry, there is a line that blood and outsiders must never cross. Before we finish this explosive update, I must remind my Crown Jest friends and families that everything we have shared here today, a story of Abigail, the 7 dishes, and the confrontation with the wise, is based on rumors and alleged information making the rounds on social media. These are trending stories from the digital streets and should be treated as unverified reports, not as absolute facts. We bring you the heat as it drops, but always remember to take these gists with a pinch of salt.